The phone call that shattered my world came at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the kitchen clock, wondering if I should call Patricia myself about the wedding details. When I picked up the phone to ask my son-in-law Marshall about the specific date so I could book my flight, his laughter crackled through the speaker like breaking glass. It wasn't the warm chuckle of a happy groom. It was cold, sharp, dismissive, the kind of sound that makes your blood turn to ice water. "Oh, the wedding," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice, the casual cruelty that hit me like a physical blow. "We actually got married yesterday, Wesley." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Yesterday. My only daughter had gotten married yesterday, and I was hearing about it from her husband like it was an afterthought, a detail he'd forgotten to mention. "Yesterday?" I whispered, my throat suddenly dry as sandpaper. "Yeah, it was very intimate, very small," Marshall continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We only invited special people. You understand, right? You're getting older and the noise and travel would have just been too much for you. We did it for your own good, really. My name is Wesley Garrison. I'm 60 years old, and I've been through hell and back in my life. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I built a construction company from nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. I watched my beloved wife, Beverly, fight cancer for 18 months before it finally took her 5 years ago. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the knife that Marshall had just twisted in my heart. I stood there in my kitchen, looking at the $2,200 Navy suit hanging in my bedroom closet, still wrapped in plastic from the dry cleaner. The suit I'd bought specifically for this day. The suit I'd been planning to wear while walking my daughter down the aisle. I am the father of the bride. I paid for their engagement party at the country club. I've been covering their rent, their car payments, their credit cards for 3 solid years, keeping them afloat while Marshall built his business. I've written checks totaling over $200,000 to give them the start in life I never had, but I wasn't special enough. The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hand. Through my kitchen window, I could see my workshop, the place where I'd built Patricia's first dollhouse, where I'd taught her to use tools, where I'd refinished her old bedroom furniture when she moved out to college. "Wesley, you there?" Marshall's voice cut through my shock. He sounded impatient, like he had better things to do than explain why they'd excluded me from the most important day of my daughter's life. I didn't say a word. I couldn't trust my voice. The rage and hurt were building in my chest like steam in a boiler, and I knew if I opened my mouth, everything would come pouring out. The years of financial support, the fake emergencies I'd covered, the way they treated me like an ATM with legs. I simply hung up the phone. The click was soft, but it felt like the sound of a door slamming shut forever. My hand didn't shake. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a freezing over of 34 years of fatherly love. It was the same cold I'd felt in the jungles of Vietnam when you realized the enemy was closer than you thought. I walked to my bedroom and looked at that suit one more time. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, with a silver tie that Beverly had helped me pick out before she died. "Patricia will love it," she'd said, her thin hand squeezing mine in the cancer ward. "You'll look so handsome walking her down the aisle." But there would be no aisle, no walk, no father-daughter dance to the song Beverly and I had chosen together, Butterfly Kisses, the one that always made Patricia cry when she was little. I took the suit down from the closet door. I carried it to the kitchen, past Beverly's photo on the mantle, past the refrigerator covered with pictures of Patricia growing up. First day of school, high school graduation, college acceptance letter. I opened the back door and walked to the burn barrel where I dispose of construction scraps and yard waste. The lighter in my pocket was the same Zippo I'd carried in Vietnam, engraved with my unit number. My hands were steady as I flicked it open. The flame caught the plastic covering first, then the fabric. The suit burned clean and bright, turning to ash in less than 5 minutes. Navy blue wool and silver silk reduced to nothing. If I wasn't special enough to witness my daughter's wedding, then this suit wasn't special enough to hang in my closet as a reminder of my failure as a father. But as I watched the last of the fabric disappear into smoke, something else was burning inside me. Not just hurt, that was too small a word. Not just anger, that was too simple. It was the cold, calculating fury of a man who'd spent 40 years building things and was now prepared to tear something down. Marshall had made a mistake. He'd declared war on the wrong old man. He thought I was weak, forgettable, easily dismissed. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Standing there in my backyard, watching the smoke rise into the Texas sky, I made a decision that would change everything. They wanted to play games with family loyalty. They wanted to treat me like I was already dead. Fine. Let's see how they handle it when the Bank of Dad goes permanently out of business. The war had begun, and I intended to win. That silence in my kitchen after burning the suit was louder than any artillery barrage I'd heard in Vietnam. It was the sound of a reality collapsing, of 34 years of fatherhood crumbling into dust. But I'm not the kind of man who stays down when he gets hit. In construction, when the foundation cracks, you don't just patch it over. You dig down to find out why it failed in the first place. For 3 years, I'd been playing the role of the simple retired contractor. I live in a modest 4-bedroom ranch house on 2 acres outside Dallas. I drive a 8-year-old Chevy Silverado with 180,000 miles on it. I shop at Home Depot and use coupons at the grocery store like any other working man trying to stretch his retirement savings. To my daughter Patricia and her husband Marshall, I'm just Wesley, the old construction guy who got lucky when he sold his business and is slowly spending his nest egg to keep them comfortable. They see a man whose useful life is winding down, whose best days are behind him. They have no idea who I really am. They don't know that when I sold Garrison Construction 5 years ago, I didn't just get a modest payout. I walked away with $3.2 million after taxes, the result of 4 decades of 12-hour days, careful investments, and building a reputation that made my company worth buying. They don't know that the townhouse they live in, that upscale development in Richardson with the golf course view they love to post on social media, isn't rented from some faceless property management company. It's owned by Lone Star Properties, LLC, a limited liability company that I control through a web of legal structures my attorney set up years ago. I am their landlord. I am their bank. I am the safety net they've been jumping on with muddy boots for 3 years, taking my support for granted while secretly planning to cut me out of the biggest moment of Patricia's life. The irony was bitter as black coffee. They'd been living in a property I owned while plotting to exclude me from their lives. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000, my planned wedding gift. I'd imagined Patricia's face when I handed it to her during the father-daughter dance, the way she'd realized that her old dad had always been looking out for her. I stared at the check, at Patricia's name written in the beneficiary line in my careful handwriting. Then I took out my Vietnam-era Zippo lighter, the one with my unit insignia etched on the side. The corner of the check caught fire immediately, curling into orange flame. I dropped it into the ashtray Beverly had given me for my workshop and watched $25,000 turn to ash. It burned clean, leaving nothing but gray powder. If I wasn't special enough to see my daughter say I do, then my money wasn't special enough to fund their honeymoon to Cabo. But the exclusion wasn't just about hurt feelings. Something in Marshall's voice had triggered my bullshit detector. The same instinct that had kept me alive in the jungle and helped me spot dishonest subcontractors for 40 years. Very intimate, very small, he'd said. But you don't exclude the father of the bride from a genuinely small ceremony unless you're ashamed of him. And Marshall Spencer wasn't ashamed of anyone. He was too narcissistic for that. No, this was something else. This was deliberate, calculated. I needed to know the truth. I called my old Army buddy Tommy Rodriguez, a guy I'd served with in the 1st Infantry Division who'd transitioned into cybersecurity after the war. We still met for beers every month at the VFW post, and I knew he had skills that went far beyond what he advertised. Tommy, I said when he picked up, I need a favor. And I need it kept between us. What kind of favor, Wes? The kind that never happened. An hour later, Tommy was sitting in my kitchen with his laptop, bypassing Patricia and Marshall's social media privacy settings like they were made of tissue paper. His fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. "You sure you want to see this?" he asked, his weathered face grim. "Show me." The photos loaded one by one on his screen, high-resolution evidence of my betrayal. The venue wasn't some intimate chapel. It was the grand ballroom at the Preston Country Club, the same place where Dallas's elite held their charity galas. I knew that venue. The rental fee alone was more than most people's annual salary. The guest list wasn't intimate either. I counted at least 150 people in the crowd shots. I recognized faces, Marshall's business associates, Patricia's sorority sisters, people from their country club set, people who'd probably asked where Patricia's father was, and what lie had they been told? That I was sick? That I couldn't travel? That I was too senile to attend my own daughter's wedding? But the photo that broke something fundamental inside me was Patricia walking down the aisle. She wasn't alone. She was radiant in an $8,000 Vera Wang gown. I knew the price because I'd seen the charge on the emergency credit card I'd given her. And she was beaming on the arm of Marshall's stepfather. Richard Spencer, the car dealership magnate Marshall always bragged about, was giving my daughter away. Taking my place. playing the role of the proud father while I sat in my kitchen waiting for a phone call that would never come. "Son of a bitch," Tommy muttered, studying the photos. "This wasn't small, Wes. This was a production." I zoomed in on Patricia's face. She looked radiant, genuinely happy. She wasn't missing her father at all. She was exactly where she wanted to be, surrounded by money and status and people who looked like they belonged in a magazine. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I hadn't been excluded because I was too old or too much trouble. I'd been cut out because I didn't fit the image they were trying to project. I was the working-class contractor who'd gotten lucky, not the sophisticated patriarch they wanted in their wedding photos. "You want me to crash their social media?" Tommy asked quietly. "I can make their lives very complicated very quickly." I closed the laptop and looked out at my workshop, at the place where I'd built everything from birdhouses to Beverly's Hope chest. "No," I said, "that's too fast, too easy. They need to feel this slowly. They need to understand that every choice has consequences." Tommy packed up his gear. "Whatever you're planning, Wes, just remember, revenge is a dish best served cold." After he left, I sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, planning my next move. They'd declared war by excluding me from the most important day of my daughter's life. Now they were going to learn what happens when you back a combat veteran into a corner. The bank of Dad was about to close permanently, and the foreclosure was going to hurt. For the next 6 days, I went about my normal routine while quietly dismantling the financial empire I'd built around Patricia and Marshall. On the surface, nothing changed. I worked in my shop, rebuilding the engine on my old Ford tractor. I attended my Thursday night poker game at the VFW with the other Vietnam veterans. I grocery shopped with my coupons and paid my bills like any other retiree. But underneath, I was rewiring the entire infrastructure of our relationship, shifting from father mode to strategic warfare mode. I pulled out the thick file folder labeled Patricia and Marshall from my home office filing cabinet. 3 years of financial records meticulously documented because that's how you survive in the construction business. You track every nail, every board foot of lumber, every hour of labor. The numbers were staggering when I laid them out on my kitchen table. Monthly rent for their Richardson townhouse, $2,800. Credit card payments for their emergencies, $1,500 average per month. Marshall's Infinity Q50 payment and full coverage insurance, $850. Cell phones, utilities, and miscellaneous support, another $400. Total monthly support, $5,550. That's $6,600 per year, more than many working families make, handed over as gifts because I wanted them to have the opportunities I'd never had. I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking. The automatic transfer for their rent was scheduled to execute on the 5th of every month, like clockwork. For 3 years, that money had moved from my account to theirs without fail, keeping them afloat while Marshall chased one failed business opportunity after another. I hovered the cursor over the cancel scheduled transfer button. For just a moment, maybe 10 seconds, I hesitated. I thought about Patricia at age 7, the day I'd taught her to ride a bike in our old driveway, how she'd looked back at me with complete trust, knowing I'd never let her fall. I thought about the promise I'd made to Beverly during those last terrible weeks in the cancer ward. "Take care of our little girl," she'd whispered, her hand paper-thin in mine. "Don't let the world hurt her." But then I looked at the laptop screen again, at the photo Tommy had pulled up of Patricia laughing with Marshall's stepfather as they danced at the reception I'd been excluded from. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was a grown woman who'd made a choice about who belonged in her life, and apparently that didn't include the man who'd raised her. I clicked cancel. The transaction disappeared from my scheduled payments list with clinical efficiency. No ceremony, no fanfare, just a digital erasure of 3 years of financial support. Next, I navigated to the credit card company website. Patricia had a supplementary card on my account for emergencies only, a card that had somehow become her personal shopping fund for designer clothes, expensive dinners, and spa treatments. I reported the card as lost and requested immediate cancellation. Then I called my insurance company and removed Marshall's vehicle from my policy. The agent was surprised. Apparently, dropping coverage on a family member's car usually meant something serious had happened. "Just updating my policy," I told him. "The young man needs to learn about responsibility." The entire process took less than 30 minutes. 3 years of financial scaffolding, dismantled with mouse clicks and phone calls. It was surgical. It was silent. It was done. Now came the hard part, waiting. I knew exactly when the first call would come. Marshall might be careless with details, but he had a predator's instinct for when money was involved. The 5th fell on a Tuesday. At 9 a.m. sharp, the property management company for Lone Star Properties would send out automated late rent notices. Marshall would get that notice around 9:15. I spent the morning in my workshop sanding down boards for a new dining table. Working with my hands had always calmed my mind, and I needed to stay focused for what was coming. At 9:20, my phone buzzed with a text message. I let it sit on my workbench while I finished the board I was working on. The message read, "Dad, did you forget the rent transfer? Please call ASAP." 20 minutes later, another text. "Dad, this is urgent. The landlord is asking questions. Please respond." By 10:30, Marshall was calling directly. I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 10:45. Then 11 o'clock. Each missed call was a small victory. Each unanswered text was proof that the psychological pressure was building. Marshall Spencer had never been told no in his life, not by his wealthy stepfather, not by my daughter, and certainly not by the old man he'd been treating like a personal ATM. At 11:30, I finally answered. "Wesley!" Marshall's voice was sharp with irritation. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning." "I've been working," I said calmly, not bothering to explain that I'd been ignoring his calls on purpose. "What can I do for you, Marshall?" "The rent transfer didn't go through. The property company is saying we're late. Did you forget to set it up this month?" The casual assumption in his voice, that I'd simply forgotten like some senile old man who couldn't manage his own finances, made my jaw clench. But I kept my voice level. "I didn't forget anything," I said. There was a pause. "Okay, well, can you send it now? It's $2,800. Same as always." The landlord is being a real pain about it. I almost laughed. Marshall was complaining to me about the landlord, not knowing that he was in fact complaining to the landlord. "I'm not sending it," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean you're not sending it?" "I mean exactly what I said. I'm not sending the money. Wesley, this isn't funny. We have bills to pay. We have obligations." "You do have obligations," I agreed. "To your landlord, to your credit card companies, to your insurance agent. None of those obligations are mine anymore." "What the hell has gotten into you?" Marshall's voice was rising now, the first hint of real panic creeping in. "We had a deal. You said you'd help us until my business got established." "The deal was that I'd help family," I said, letting each word land like a hammer blow. "But family invites family to weddings. Family doesn't lie about intimate ceremonies while throwing 150-person parties. Family doesn't treat their father like an ATM that's not allowed in the lobby." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You're doing this because of the wedding?" Marshall finally said, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're having some kind of tantrum because you didn't get cake and champagne? I'm doing this because you showed me exactly how much I mean to you," I replied, "and I'm returning the favor." I hung up on Marshall without another word. The click of the phone disconnecting felt like the closing of a chapter, the end of 3 years of being taken for granted by people who saw me as nothing more than a financial convenience. But I knew this was just the opening shot. Marshall Spencer wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat gracefully. He was a narcissist and a bully, accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and emotional manipulation. When those tactics failed, he'd escalate. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, storm clouds were gathering over North Texas, painting the sky the color of old bruises. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard tires screech in my driveway, followed by the aggressive rumble of Marshall's Infiniti engine being revved like a weapon. I didn't need to look out the window to know what was coming. Marshall drove that car like he lived his life, fast, reckless, and with complete disregard for anyone else on the road. 2 car doors slammed in rapid succession, heavy footsteps on my front porch. Then the doorbell, pressed repeatedly in angry staccato bursts. I unlocked the front door and stepped back into my kitchen, leaving it slightly ajar. I wanted them to come in. I wanted this confrontation to happen on my territory, where the security cameras I'd installed after Beverly's death would record every word and every gesture. The door flew open without ceremony. They still had keys, a privilege I'd be revoking very soon. Marshall burst into my kitchen like a man possessed. His face was flushed red with anger, a vein pulsing visibly in his forehead. He was wearing wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a manic gleam in his eyes that I recognized from my army days. The look of a man who was cornered and desperate. Patricia followed behind him, pale and anxious, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. and she kept glancing between Marshall and me like she was watching a tennis match where the ball might explode. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Marshall shouted, slamming his palm down on my granite countertop hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. "You can't just cut us off like that. We have obligations." I didn't flinch. I'd faced down angry union bosses who made Marshall look like a playground bully. I calmly buttered my toast and took a sip of coffee. "Good morning to you too, Marshall. Patricia, you look tired." "Don't play games with me, old man," Marshall hissed, stepping into my personal space. He was trying to intimidate me with his size. He stood about 6'2" and worked out at an expensive gym that I'd probably paid for indirectly. But he'd forgotten that I was built like the construction worker I'd been for 40 years, with hands that could swing a sledgehammer all day and arms that had carried wounded soldiers through Vietnamese jungles. "The rent," Marshall continued, his voice rising to a near shout. "The credit cards. You cut everything off without warning. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said mildly. "We were at dinner last night with clients, important people, and my card was declined. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Do you know what that does to my reputation?" "Clients?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or were they special people?" Marshall's face went even redder. "You're being ridiculous. This is about money, not some hurt feelings about a wedding." Patricia finally found her voice. "Dad, please," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. The same manipulation tactic she'd been using since she was 5 years old. "You're scaring me. Why are you doing this? We just got married. We're supposed to be happy, and you're ruining everything." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist that I'd paid for. I saw the designer highlights in her hair that came from a $300 salon visit charged to my emergency card. I saw the Louis Vuitton handbag that cost more than most people spend on groceries in 3 months. "I'm ruining it?" I asked softly. "Patricia, you didn't invite me to your wedding. I wasn't there to see you walk down the aisle. How exactly am I ruining something I was deliberately excluded from?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Dad, we explained this. It was small, intimate. We didn't want you to feel out of place." "Out of place?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "At my own daughter's wedding? Or did you mean you didn't want your wealthy new in-laws to see your working-class father in his off-the-rack suit?" "That's not true," Patricia protested, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. "It doesn't matter what's true," Marshall interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "What matters is that we're family, and family helps family. You promised to support us until my business got established." "I promised to help family," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. "But family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't steal from each other. And family sure as hell doesn't treat their father like an ATM that's not allowed at family gatherings." Marshall sneered. "Oh, so this is about your bruised ego. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your piece of wedding cake. How pathetic." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "No, Marshall, this is about respect. Something you've never shown me, and something you're clearly incapable of understanding." "Respect doesn't pay bills," Marshall shot back. "And neither does your wounded pride. Now stop acting like a child and transfer the money. We've got late fees piling up." I looked at both of them standing in my kitchen. The kitchen where Beverly and I had shared thousands of morning conversations, where we'd planned Patricia's future, where we'd dreamed about grandchildren we'd spoil and Sunday dinners we'd host. "No," I said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "What did you say?" Marshall's voice dropped to a whisper, which was somehow more threatening than his shouting. I said no. "The Bank of Dad is permanently closed. You want to live in that townhouse? Earn it. You want to drive a luxury car? Pay for it yourself. You want to eat at 5-star restaurants? Get jobs that can afford the tab." Marshall laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You can't do that. You know we can't afford that place on our income." "Then move," I said. The simplicity of the solution seemed to break something in Marshall's brain. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to hit me. Instead, he leaned in close, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with fury. "Listen to me, you stubborn old fool," he hissed. "You're going to turn that money back on, because if you don't, you'll never see Patricia again. Never. We'll cut you out of our lives so completely that when you die alone in this house, no one will find your body for weeks." I hung up on Marshall without another word. The click of the phone disconnecting felt like the closing of a chapter, the end of 3 years of being taken for granted by people who saw me as nothing more than a financial convenience. but I knew this was just the opening shot. Marshall Spencer wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat gracefully. He was a narcissist and a bully, accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and emotional manipulation. When those tactics failed, he'd escalate. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, storm clouds were gathering over North Texas, painting the sky the color of old bruises. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard tires screech in my driveway, followed by the aggressive rumble of Marshall's Infiniti engine being revved like a weapon. I didn't need to look out the window to know what was coming. Marshall drove that car like he lived his life, fast, reckless, and with complete disregard for anyone else on the road. 2 car doors slammed in rapid succession, heavy footsteps on my front porch, then the doorbell, pressed repeatedly in angry staccato bursts. I unlocked the front door and stepped back into my kitchen, leaving it slightly ajar. I wanted them to come in. I wanted this confrontation to happen on my territory, where the security cameras I'd installed after Beverly's death would record every word and every gesture. The door flew open without ceremony. They still had keys, a privilege I'd be revoking very soon. Marshall burst into my kitchen like a man possessed. His face was flushed red with anger, a vein pulsing visibly in his forehead. He was wearing wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a manic gleam in his eyes that I recognized from my army days, the look of a man who was cornered and desperate. Patricia followed behind him, pale and anxious, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she kept glancing between Marshall and me like she was watching a tennis match where the ball might explode. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Marshall shouted, slamming his palm down on my granite countertop hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. "You can't just cut us off like that. We have obligations." I didn't flinch. I'd faced down angry union bosses who made Marshall look like a playground bully. I calmly buttered my toast and took a sip of coffee. "Good morning to you too, Marshall. Patricia, you look tired." "Don't play games with me, old man," Marshall hissed, stepping into my personal space. He was trying to intimidate me with his size. He stood about 6'2" and worked out at an expensive gym that I'd probably paid for indirectly. But he'd forgotten that I was built like the construction worker I'd been for 40 years, with hands that could swing a sledgehammer all day and arms that had carried wounded soldiers through Vietnamese jungles. "The rent," Marshall continued, his voice rising to a near shout. "The credit cards. You cut everything off without warning. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said mildly. "We were at dinner last night with clients, important people, and my card was declined. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Do you know what that does to my reputation?" "Clients?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or were they special people?" Marshall's face went even redder. "You're being ridiculous. This is about money, not some hurt feelings about a wedding." Patricia finally found her voice. "Dad, please," she said, tears welling up in her eyes, the same manipulation tactic she'd been using since she was 5 years old. "You're scaring me. Why are you doing this? We just got married. We're supposed to be happy, and you're ruining everything." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist that I'd paid for. I saw the designer highlights in her hair that came from a $300 salon visit charged to my emergency card. I saw the Louis Vuitton handbag that cost more than most people spend on groceries in 3 months. "I'm ruining it?" I asked softly. "Patricia, you didn't invite me to your wedding. I wasn't there to see you walk down the aisle. How exactly am I ruining something I was deliberately excluded from?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Dad, we explained this. It was small, intimate. We didn't want you to feel out of place." "Out of place?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "At my own daughter's wedding? Or did you mean you didn't want your wealthy new in-laws to see your working-class father in his off-the-rack suit?" "That's not true," Patricia protested, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. "It doesn't matter what's true," Marshall interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "What matters is that we're family, and family helps family. You promised to support us until my business got established." "I promised to help family," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. "But family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't steal from each other. And family sure as hell doesn't treat their father like an ATM that's not allowed at family gatherings." Marshall sneered. "Oh, so this is about your bruised ego. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your piece of wedding cake. How pathetic." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "No, Marshall. This is about respect. Something you've never shown me. and something you're clearly incapable of understanding. Respect doesn't pay bills, Marshall shot back, and neither does your wounded pride. Now stop acting like a child and transfer the money. We've got late fees piling up. I looked at both of them standing in my kitchen, the kitchen where Beverly and I had shared thousands of morning conversations, where we'd planned Patricia's future, where we'd dreamed about grandchildren we'd spoil and Sunday dinners we'd host. No, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. What did you say? Marshall's voice dropped to a whisper, which was somehow more threatening than his shouting. I said no. The Bank of Dad is permanently closed. You want to live in that townhouse? Earn it. You want to drive a luxury car? Pay for it yourself. You want to eat at 5-star restaurants? Get jobs that can afford the tab. Marshall laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a harsh, barking sound. You can't do that. You know we can't afford that place on our income. Then move, I said. The simplicity of the solution seemed to break something in Marshall's brain. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to hit me. Instead, he leaned in close, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with fury. Listen to me, you stubborn old fool, he hissed. You're going to turn that money back on, because if you don't, you'll never see Patricia again. Never! We'll cut you out of our lives so completely that when you die alone in this house, no one will find your body for weeks. The forensic accounting report arrived on my desk 3 days later, delivered by courier in a sealed envelope marked confidential. Eugene had hired the best financial investigators in Dallas, the kind of people who specialized in unraveling complex fraud schemes and finding money that people thought they'd hidden. I expected to find evidence of irresponsibility, maybe some maxed-out credit cards, a few missed car payments, the typical financial chaos of young people living beyond their means. I was prepared to discover that Marshall was a fool with money. I was not prepared to discover that he was a criminal. The first number that jumped off the page was written in red ink at the bottom of the summary sheet. $247,000. Total outstanding liabilities, classified as high-risk unsecured debt, $250,000. I stared at that number until it burned into my retinas. How does a car salesman with 0 documented sales in the past 8 months accumulate that kind of debt? Banks don't lend money to ghosts, and legitimate businesses don't extend credit to people with no income. I called Eugene immediately. Tell me I'm reading this wrong, I said, holding the report like it might explode. This says Marshall owes nearly $250,000 to various creditors. You're reading it correctly, Eugene replied grimly. And Wesley, those aren't traditional creditors. This is shadow banking, the kind of debt that comes with broken kneecaps as collateral. I flipped through the detailed breakdown, my stomach sinking with each page. Marshall Spencer wasn't just living beyond his means. He was living in a fantasy world funded by digital loan sharks and offshore gambling sites. The largest chunk, $89,000, was owed to something called Caribbean Gaming Consortium, which the investigators identified as an unregulated online poker platform operating out of the Cayman Islands. Marshall had been playing high-stakes Texas Hold'em against professional players, losing consistently and borrowing more money to chase his losses. Another $67,000 was tied up in cryptocurrency speculation. The report showed a pattern of increasingly desperate trades, buying Bitcoin at peaks, selling at valleys, borrowing against future positions that never materialized. It was financial suicide disguised as investment strategy. The remaining $91,000 was spread across local bookies, payday loan operations, and something the report euphemistically called private lending services, which Eugene explained were essentially mob-connected loan sharks who didn't report to credit agencies because they had more effective collection methods. The interest rates on these debts are astronomical, Eugene continued. He's paying anywhere from 18% to 45% annually, which means his monthly interest alone is over $8,000. That's more than most people's total monthly income. I sat back in my chair, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Marshall's sudden panic when I cut off his funding, his sweaty desperation during our confrontation, the threats, the intimidation tactics, the willingness to burn bridges with his father-in-law, it wasn't just entitlement. It was terror. Marshall Spencer was a dead man walking, and he'd been using my money to keep breathing. There's more, Eugene said, and I heard papers rustling on his end of the line. The investigators found evidence of what they're calling structured financial manipulation going back 18 months. Explain that in English. Marshall has been systematically inflating his emergency requests to you. Remember that $3,500 car repair last spring? The actual repair bill was $1,200. He pocketed the difference. The $8,000 medical emergency for Patricia last summer? She had a routine dental cleaning. The money went straight to his gambling accounts. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. For 18 months, Marshall had been manufacturing crises, exploiting my love for Patricia to fund his addiction. Every sob story, every urgent phone call, every tearful explanation from my daughter about unexpected expenses. It was all a lie designed to transfer money from my account to his gambling debts. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Conservative estimate? About $47,000 in fabricated emergencies over the past year and a half. That's on top of the legitimate support you were providing. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the workshop where I'd taught Patricia to use tools, where we'd built birdhouses and jewelry boxes together when she was young. Had she known about the lies? Had she been complicit in the deception? Or was she just another victim of Marshall's manipulation? The report provided an answer I wasn't expecting. Buried in the financial records was evidence that Patricia had been receiving direct payments from Marshall, regular transfers of $500 to $1,000 labeled as allowance or spending money. Money that had originated from my emergency fund, filtered through Marshall's gambling accounts, and returned to my daughter as payment for her participation in the fraud. She wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. Eugene, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, what are my options here? Legally? We can file criminal charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The amounts involved push this into felony territory. We can also pursue civil recovery for the fraudulent transfers. And practically? Eugene was quiet for a moment. Practically, Wesley, these people are desperate. Marshall owes money to individuals who don't send collection letters. They send people with crowbars. If we move against him legally, we need to assume he'll try to drag you down with him. I thought about Marshall's threat from the other day. We're going to destroy you. Everyone will know you're a senile, abusive old man. What kind of destruction are we talking about? Best case scenario? He tries to paint you as mentally incompetent to invalidate any testimony you might give. Worst case? He gets violent. Men with gambling debts this size have been known to do desperate things when their world starts collapsing. I looked at the report again, at the cascade of lies and manipulation that had been hidden behind Patricia's smile and Marshall's charm. For 3 years, I'd been funding a criminal enterprise while believing I was helping my family build a future. There's one more thing you need to know, Eugene said. The investigators found some interesting information about that townhouse they're renting. What about it? The property is owned by something called Lone Star Properties, LLC. Ring any bells? Despite everything, I almost smiled. That's my company, Eugene. I bought that development 4 years ago as an investment property. The silence on Eugene's end stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Jesus Christ, Wesley, you mean to tell me that Marshall has been demanding you give him money to pay rent to yourself? For 3 years, I confirmed. He's been laundering my own money back to me while skimming off the top to pay his gambling debts. Eugene started laughing. Not with humor, but with the bitter appreciation of a lawyer who'd seen every kind of human stupidity but could still be surprised by new variations. Wesley, this changes everything. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is a pattern of criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, identity theft, and elder abuse. We're not just going to court, we're going to federal court. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's betrayal. The numbers didn't lie, the bank records didn't lie. The pattern of deception was as clear as a blueprint. For 3 years I'd been played by experts. But the game was about to change because Marshall Spencer had made one critical error in his planning. He'd declared war on a man who'd spent 40 years in the construction business, where every contract has an escape clause, and every foundation gets inspected before you build on it. Armed with the forensic accounting evidence, Eugene and I moved into full legal warfare mode. The beauty of having spent 40 years in construction was that I understood the importance of proper planning, precise timing, and overwhelming force when you finally pulled the trigger. Eugene filed multiple actions simultaneously, like a coordinated military strike designed to leave the enemy no escape routes. First, the eviction notice for the Richardson townhouse, citing non-payment of rent and suspected illegal gambling activities on the premises. Texas law allows landlords to begin eviction proceedings immediately when they suspect criminal activity, and Marshall's poker games with his gambling buddies gave us all the justification we needed. Second, criminal complaints with both the Dallas County District Attorney and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The amounts involved, over $200,000 in fraudulent transfers, pushed this into federal jurisdiction, especially with the offshore gambling connections. Third, civil suits for elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and unjust enrichment. Eugene was seeking full recovery of the fraudulent payments plus punitive damages, legal fees, and interest. We're not just going to court, Eugene explained as he finalized the paperwork. We're going to war. By the time we're finished, Marshall Spencer won't be able to get a loan to buy a cup of coffee. The eviction notice was served at 9:00 a.m. on a Friday morning by a professional process server who looked like he could bench press a pickup truck. Eugene had specifically chosen someone intimidating, knowing that Marshall would try to bluster his way out of the situation. I was working in my shop, installing new locks on a cabinet I was building for the VFW, when my phone rang at 9:47 a.m. "Wesley!" Marshall's voice was high and panicked, the smooth confidence completely gone. "What the hell is this eviction notice? The landlord can't kick us out. We have rights." I set down my screwdriver and smiled. "Good morning, Marshall. I understand you received some paperwork." "This is bullshit. We're only a week late on rent and the lease gives us a grace period. I'm calling a lawyer." "You should definitely call a lawyer," I agreed. "You're going to need a good one. Don't play games with me, old man. I know you're behind this somehow." "You called the landlord, didn't you? You told them to evict us." I almost laughed. "Marshall, why would I need to call the landlord?" "I am the landlord." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Marshall's head as he processed what I'd just told him. "What did you say?" he whispered. "Lone Star Properties, LLC. That's the company that owns your townhouse. I'm the managing partner. For 3 years, you've been demanding that I give you money so you could pay rent to me. You've been laundering my own money back to myself while skimming off the top to pay your gambling debts." More silence. Then, a sound I'd never heard before, Marshall Spencer completely speechless. "The eviction is for non-payment of rent and illegal use of the premises," I continued, enjoying every second of his shocked silence. "Specifically, operating an unlicensed gambling establishment in violation of Texas Penal Code Section 47.02. "You son of a bitch," Marshall finally managed, his voice barely a croak. "You've been playing us this whole time." "No, Marshall. You've been playing yourselves. I've just been keeping score." The line went dead. Within 2 hours, my security cameras picked up Marshall's Infiniti pulling into my driveway at dangerous speeds. But this time, he wasn't just angry. He was desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Instead of coming to the front door, Marshall went straight to my detached garage and started pounding on the side door, the one that led directly into my workshop. "Open this door, Wesley!" he screamed. "We need to talk!" I called 911 from my workshop phone while watching him through the window. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "This is Wesley Garrison at 1247 Oak Creek Road," I told the dispatcher. "The same individual who threatened me earlier this week is back on my property, attempting to break into my workshop. I have an active police report from the previous incident. Sir, are you in a safe location? I'm locked inside my workshop. He's trying to force the door." Through the window, I watched Marshall pick up a piece of lumber from my scrap pile, a 2x4 about 3 feet long, and start using it as a battering ram against the door. Each impact sent shockwaves through the steel frame, but the door held. "Wesley!" he shouted between impacts. "I know you're in there. We can work this out. Just talk to me." The desperation in his voice was palpable. This wasn't the arrogant con man who'd excluded me from the wedding or the entitled bully who'd threatened me in my kitchen. This was a drowning man thrashing around for anything that might keep him afloat. "I've got $250,000 in debts!" he screamed, apparently not caring who heard him. "People are looking for me. If you don't help me, they're going to kill me." There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. The confession that this had never been about family or love or building a future together. It had always been about Marshall Spencer's gambling addiction and the terrible consequences that came with owing money to the wrong people. The police arrived 6 minutes later, 2 patrol cars and a supervisor. Officer Rodriguez was among them, and she recognized both me and the situation immediately. "Mr. Spencer," she called out through a megaphone, "step away from the building and place your hands where we can see them." Marshall dropped the 2x4 and spun around, wild-eyed and breathing hard. For a moment I thought he might try to run, but there was nowhere to go. My property was surrounded by open fields, and the police had blocked the only exit. "He's trying to destroy me," Marshall shouted, pointing at my workshop. "He owns my apartment. He's been manipulating us for years." "Sir, you need to calm down and step away from the building," Officer Rodriguez repeated. "You don't understand," Marshall's voice cracked. "I owe people money, dangerous people. If I can't get him to help me, they're going to—" "Mr. Spencer, "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted breaking and entering," Officer Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through Marshall's hysteria. As they handcuffed him, Marshall looked directly at my workshop window. His face was a mask of rage and desperation. But underneath it all, I saw something else, the dawning realization that he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. "This isn't over, Wesley," he screamed as they loaded him into the patrol car. "You think you're so smart, but I'm going to take you down with me. Everyone's going to know what you really are." I watched the patrol car disappear down my driveway, carrying Marshall Spencer toward his first taste of what his choices had earned him. The workshop felt quiet and peaceful again, filled with the familiar smells of sawdust and machine oil. I picked up the phone and called Eugene. "Marshall just got himself arrested for attempted breaking and entering," I reported. "And Eugene? He confessed to everything in front of 3 police officers. The gambling debts, the desperation, the whole scheme." "Beautiful," Eugene replied. "Nothing quite like a confession made in public with multiple witnesses. How are you feeling, Wesley?" I looked around my workshop at the tools I'd collected over 40 years, at the projects in various stages of completion, at the safe, familiar space where I'd taught my daughter to measure twice and cut once. "I feel like I'm finally building something that's going to last," I said. Marshall's arrest made the local news, not because anyone particularly cared about a failed car salesman with gambling debts, but because the story had all the elements that Dallas media loved: wealthy family drama, hidden property ownership, and a desperate man attacking his father-in-law's workshop with a 2x4. "Local man arrested for attacking father-in-law's property," read the headline in the Dallas Morning News online edition. The article was brief but damaging, mentioning Marshall's gambling debts and the ongoing eviction proceedings. Within hours, it was shared across Facebook by half the people in Richardson, including several of Patricia and Marshall's former friends. I was reading the article on my laptop when my phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the caller ID, the first time she'd contacted me directly since the confrontation in my kitchen a week earlier. I almost didn't answer. Eugene had advised me to let all communication go through him from this point forward. But some part of me, the part that remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle and helping with her homework, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Dad?" Her voice was small, broken. Nothing like the entitled woman who'd stood in my kitchen demanding money. "Hello, Patricia? Dad, please, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" "Just for a few minutes? That's not a good idea. My attorney has advised me not to have any contact with you or Marshall while the legal proceedings are ongoing." "Please," she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I'm not calling about Marshall. I'm calling about us. About what's left of our family." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, the coffee shop in the Barnes & Noble, where I'd taken her for story time when she was little. Public enough to be safe, familiar enough to feel comfortable. She was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, hunched over a cup of untouched coffee. She looked terrible, her hair unwashed, her eyes red from crying, wearing a simple sweater and jeans instead of her usual designer outfits. The transformation was so complete that I almost didn't recognize her. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "You have 10 minutes, Patricia. What do you want to say?" "I want to apologize. For all of it. The wedding, the lies, the money. I know how it looks, and I know you have every right to hate me." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated performance I'd learned to expect. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse. "Go on," I said. "Marshall told me about the gambling debts yesterday before the police came. He confessed everything: the fake emergencies, the offshore accounts, the loan sharks." "Dad, I swear to you, I didn't know the full scope of what he was doing." "But you knew some of it," I said. "It wasn't a question." Patricia's composure cracked. "Yes, I knew he was gambling online, but he told me it was just small amounts. Poker games with friends. He said he was winning more than he was losing. And the emergency money, the inflated repair bills?" She closed her eyes. "He told me the extra money was for investments, for our future. He said you were so generous that we should take advantage of it while we could, build up a nest egg for when we had kids. So you knew you were deceiving me. I thought we were just being smart about managing family money. I didn't realize he was using it to cover gambling losses." I wanted to believe her. Some part of me desperately wanted to accept this version of events, where Patricia was a naive victim rather than a calculating co-conspirator. But the forensic accounting report had been very clear about the direct payments Marshall had made to her personal accounts. What about the $500 monthly payments Marshall was making to you? I asked. The ones labeled as allowance in your bank records? Patricia went pale. How do you know about those? Because I hired forensic accountants, Patricia. I know about all of it. The question is whether you're going to keep lying to me or finally tell me the truth. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup as if the answers were floating somewhere in the dark liquid. He told me it was commission money, she finally said. He said his business was starting to pick up and he wanted to share the profits with me. I thought he was finally becoming successful. Even when he hadn't made a legitimate sale in 8 months, I didn't know that. He left for work every morning. He talked about clients and deals. He showed me fake contracts, fake commission statements. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I sat back in my chair, studying my daughter's face. She was either the most skilled liar I'd ever met, or she was telling the truth about being manipulated by a professional con man. The wedding, I said. Explain that to me. Explain how you excluded your father from the most important day of your life. Patricia started crying in earnest now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Other customers in the coffee shop were starting to stare, but she didn't seem to notice. That was all Marshall, she gasped between sobs. He said you wouldn't fit in with his family's crowd. He said you'd be uncomfortable with all the wealthy people, that it would be better to have a small ceremony and then take you out for a nice dinner later to celebrate. But it wasn't small. No, it wasn't. He lied about that too. He told me his stepfather was insisting on inviting business associates, that it had gotten out of hand. By the time I realized how big it was going to be, the invitations were already sent and you weren't on the list. And you went along with it. I should have stopped it. I should have insisted that you be invited. I should have called the whole thing off rather than exclude you. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Dad, I was so caught up in the dress and the flowers and the venue that I lost sight of what really mattered. I'm so sorry. I felt something shift inside my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that my daughter might actually be capable of genuine remorse. What do you want from me, Patricia? I asked. I want to make this right. I want to help you get back the money Marshall stole. I want to testify against him if that's what it takes. And I want a chance to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me, broken and desperate and possibly sincere. She was no longer the entitled princess who'd demanded money in my kitchen, or the manipulative daughter who'd helped orchestrate fake emergencies. She was just Patricia, scared and alone and finally facing the consequences of the choices she'd made. Marshall's arraignment is next Tuesday, I said finally. If you're serious about helping, you need to call Eugene Mitchell, my attorney. Tell him everything you just told me, but under oath, in a formal deposition. I will. I'll call him tomorrow. And Patricia? If I find out you're lying to me again, if this is just another manipulation, there won't be any more chances. Do you understand me? She nodded, wiping her face with a napkin. I understand, Dad, and I promise, no more lies. Whatever else happens, no more lies between us. I stood up to leave, then stopped and looked back at her. One more thing. That townhouse you've been living in? You need to be out by Friday. The eviction is proceeding regardless of what happens with Marshall. I know, I already started packing. As I walked to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe my daughter could be saved after all. Patricia kept her word. On Monday morning, she walked into Eugene Mitchell's law office and gave a sworn deposition that lasted 4 hours. She detailed every fake emergency, every inflated bill, every lie Marshall had told her about his income and business prospects. She provided bank records showing the monthly allowance payments and testified that she'd believed they were legitimate business earnings. Most importantly, she admitted her own role in the deception, acknowledging that she'd known something wasn't right but had chosen to look the other way because the lifestyle was too comfortable to question. She's either telling the truth or she's the most accomplished liar in Texas, Eugene told me after Patricia left his office. But her testimony corroborates everything in the forensic report. More importantly, it gives us a credible witness who can explain Marshall's manipulation tactics to a jury. Do you think she's genuinely remorseful, or is this just another con? Hard to say for certain, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've gotten pretty good at spotting performance anxiety versus genuine guilt. Patricia seems genuinely shocked by the extent of Marshall's gambling operation. I think she knew she was bending the rules, but she didn't realize she was funding a criminal enterprise. Marshall's arraignment was held the following Tuesday in the Frank Crowley Courthouse downtown. I sat in the gallery with Eugene, watching as they brought Marshall in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The transformation was startling. Gone was the smooth, confident con man who'd excluded me from my daughter's wedding. In his place was a haggard, unshaven defendant who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The charges were read aloud by the prosecutor: elder financial abuse in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and violation of Texas gambling statutes. Each count carried potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years in prison. Marshall's court-appointed attorney, his gambling debts had apparently consumed any money he might have had for private counsel, entered a plea of not guilty and requested reasonable bail. "Your Honor," the prosecutor responded, "the defendant has demonstrated a pattern of financial manipulation spanning multiple years and involving amounts exceeding $200,000. He has significant gambling debts to offshore entities and has previously made threats against the victim. The state considers him both a flight risk and a danger to the community." The judge set bail at $500,000, money that Marshall obviously didn't have and couldn't raise. As they led him back to the holding cell, he turned and looked directly at me. The hatred in his eyes was pure and focused, but underneath it I saw something else: the recognition that he'd been beaten at his own game by someone he'd underestimated. 2 weeks later, Patricia moved out of the Richardson townhouse. She didn't ask for help with the moving costs or request an extension on the eviction deadline. She packed her belongings into a small U-Haul truck and drove away from the life Marshall had built on stolen money. She called me that evening to let me know she'd found a studio apartment in Oak Cliff and had gotten a job waiting tables at a restaurant downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, she was supporting herself without lying or manipulating anyone. "It's strange," she told me over the phone. "I forgot what it felt like to earn money instead of just asking for it. There's something satisfying about getting a paycheck that you actually worked for." The trial began 3 months later. Marshall had initially maintained his innocence, apparently believing he could charm a jury the same way he'd charmed his way into my family's finances. That strategy collapsed on the second day when the prosecutor played audio recordings from my security cameras. Recordings of Marshall threatening me in my own kitchen, admitting to the gambling debts, and confessing that he'd been using my emergency fund to pay off loan sharks. The forensic accountants testified about the systematic nature of the fraud, presenting charts and graphs that showed exactly how money had flowed from my accounts through Marshall's gambling platforms and back to his creditors. The mathematical precision of the theft was damning. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was a calculated criminal enterprise. Patricia's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the trial. She described how Marshall had gradually isolated her from friends who might have questioned their lifestyle, how he'd convinced her that lying to her father about emergencies was just smart financial planning, and how she'd slowly been drawn into a web of deception that felt normal until it was too late to escape. "I knew my father was being generous," she testified, tears streaming down her face. "But Marshall convinced me that wealthy people expected to support their children, that it would actually hurt my father's feelings if we didn't accept his help. He made me believe that independence was a form of rejection." The defense attorney tried to paint me as a controlling father who'd used money to manipulate his daughter's choices, suggesting that Marshall was simply helping Patricia escape an emotionally abusive relationship. That narrative collapsed when Eugene presented evidence of my consistent support for Patricia's independence throughout her life: college tuition paid without strings attached, a car given as a graduation gift, career counseling and job search assistance whenever she'd asked for it. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Marshall showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, staring straight ahead like a man who'd finally run out of lies to tell. At sentencing, the judge addressed Marshall directly. "Mr. Spencer, you have been convicted of systematically defrauding a man who opened his home and his heart to you. You exploited the natural love between a father and daughter to fund a gambling addiction, and when confronted with your crimes, you responded with threats and violence. This court finds your behavior despicable and sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 8 years. As the bailiffs led Marshall away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. The hatred was still there, but it was mixed now with something else. The hollow-eyed recognition of a gambler who'd bet everything on one last hand and lost. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was waiting for me on the steps. She'd attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, forcing herself to watch as the full extent of Marshall's manipulation was laid bare. "How do you feel?" she asked as we walked toward the parking garage. "Relieved," I said. "Justice doesn't bring back the money or the trust that was broken, but it does provide closure. Marshall can't hurt anyone else for the next 12 years. "And us?" Patricia asked quietly. Is there still an us after everything that's happened? I stopped walking and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by the uniform from a restaurant job. The entitled princess who'd demanded money in my kitchen had been replaced by a young woman who'd learned hard lessons about consequences and responsibility. We're going to have to rebuild from the ground up, I told her. Trust isn't something you can fix with an apology or a good intentions. It has to be earned back one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time. I'm willing to do the work, she said, however long it takes. Then we'll start tomorrow, I said. Lunch at the VFW. I want you to meet some of the men I served with, people who understand what honor really means. 2 years after Marshall's sentencing, I was standing in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel outside Flagstaff, Arizona, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. My 36-foot Winnebago was parked among a dozen other RVs, all belonging to people who'd discovered that freedom doesn't come from accumulating possessions but from learning to live without them. I'd sold everything. The house, the workshop, the construction equipment I'd accumulated over 4 decades. The only things I kept were Beverly's wedding ring, which I wear on a chain around my neck, a photo of Patricia from her college graduation, and my old Vietnam-era toolbox that had followed me through every job site I'd ever worked. The sale of Garrison Construction and all my properties had netted me $3.8 million after taxes and legal fees. It was more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes, but money had never been the point. Security was the point. Independence was the point. The ability to wake up every morning and choose my own adventure was worth more than any bank balance. I'd been on the road for 18 months, following the weather and my curiosity from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Northwest, from the desert Southwest to the Rocky Mountains. I had no schedule, no obligations, no one asking me for rent money or emergency loans. For the first time since Beverly's death, I felt genuinely free. The civil suit against Marshall had recovered most of the stolen money, about $180,000, including interest and penalties. I donated half of it to a veterans organization that helped older vets avoid financial scams, and used the other half to establish a fund that provided legal assistance to elderly people dealing with financial abuse from family members. The Catherine Foundation, I'd named it after my wife. She would have loved the irony, using Marshall's crime to help other families avoid the same betrayal. Every month I got reports about cases the foundation had helped resolve, families saved from predators who thought old age made people vulnerable. It turned out that old age just made us smarter about recognizing bullshit. Patricia and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, like reconstructing a house after a fire. You can't just paint over the damage. You have to tear everything down to the foundation and start fresh with better materials. She'd kept her job at the restaurant and worked her way up to assistant manager. She'd moved to a nicer apartment, but nothing fancy. A 1-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood that she could afford on her own income. Most importantly, she'd learned to live within her means and take pride in earning her own way. We talked every Sunday, no matter where my travels had taken me. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, stilted by the memory of all the lies that had come before. But gradually, we'd found our way back to the easy communication we'd shared when she was young. I'm thinking about going back to school, she'd told me during our most recent call. Maybe business administration or accounting. I want to understand money better, understand how people like Marshall manipulate the system. That sounds like a good plan, I'd replied. Let me know if you need help with the tuition. Dad, I appreciate the offer, but I need to do this myself. I've applied for financial aid and I can take evening classes while I work. It'll take longer, but it'll mean more if I earn it. That conversation had filled me with more pride than any amount of money ever could. My daughter had learned the value of independence, and she'd learned it the hard way. Marshall, according to Patricia's occasional updates, was not adjusting well to prison life. A man accustomed to luxury cars and expensive restaurants doesn't thrive in an environment where every comfort must be earned and every day is exactly the same. He'd been transferred twice after altercations with other inmates, and his requests for early release had been uniformly denied. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about making the other person miserable. It was about removing their ability to hurt you and others. Marshall was contained, neutralized, no longer a threat to anyone's finances or family relationships. That was justice enough. My phone rang as I was making coffee in the RV's compact kitchen. Patricia's name appeared on the caller ID, which was unusual. Our Sunday calls weren't until later. Dad, I hope I'm not calling too early. Never too early for you, sweetheart. What's going on? I have some news. Good news, I think. She paused, and I could hear the nervous excitement in her voice. I'm seeing someone. Someone I'd like you to meet. My first instinct was protective concern, the same feeling I'd had when she'd first brought Marshall around. But I caught myself before speaking. Patricia was 36 years old now, a grown woman who'd learned hard lessons about character and judgment. She didn't need my permission to date, and she certainly didn't need my suspicion. "Tell me about him," I said. "His name is David. He's a paramedic, and he volunteers at the Veterans Shelter downtown. He doesn't know about my past with Marshall. I mean, he knows I was married and that it ended badly, but he doesn't know about the fraud or the trial. I want to tell him, but I'm scared he'll think I'm damaged goods. Patricia, anyone worth dating will understand that people make mistakes and learn from them. If this David can't handle your past, then he's not the right person for your future. Would you be willing to meet him? Maybe when you pass through Dallas again? I know it's a lot to ask, given everything that happened, but your opinion matters to me." I looked out at the Arizona mountains, at the endless sky that had become my new horizon. 6 months ago, I would have been suspicious, wondering if this was another con, another attempt to manipulate me through my love for my daughter. But the woman on the phone wasn't the same person who'd helped Marshall steal from me. She was someone who'd earned back my trust through 2 years of honest living and genuine remorse. "I'd be honored to meet him," I said. In fact, I was planning to swing through Texas next month to visit the VFW post. Why don't you both come have dinner with me and the old-timers? If he volunteers with veterans, he'll fit right in." After we hung up, I sat outside my RV with my coffee, watching the desert come alive as the sun climbed higher. A roadrunner darted between the cacti, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. The world was full of life, full of possibility, full of second chances for those wise enough to recognize them. I'd started this journey as a broken man, betrayed by people I'd loved and trusted. But the road had taught me something Beverly used to say during her final weeks in the cancer ward. "Life isn't about what happens to you, Wesley. It's about what you choose to do with what happens to you." I'd chosen to rebuild rather than remain bitter. I'd chosen forgiveness over vengeance. I'd chosen the open road over the closed door. And sitting there in the Arizona desert, with nowhere to be and all day to get there, I realized I'd never been happier. The engine of the Winnebago rumbled to life as I prepared for another day of adventure. The GPS showed 247 miles to the Grand Canyon, where I planned to spend the week hiking and photographing the sunrise over one of nature's greatest masterpieces. Behind me lay the wreckage of a family torn apart by greed and deception. Ahead lay the promise of new experiences, new relationships built on honesty, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. I put the RV in drive and pointed it toward the horizon. The road was waiting, and I had miles to go before I rested. Word count, 1,000.